Time to begin. It's good to see you all out tonight. Appreciate your presence. We'll have a Bible study tonight. Before we go to our Bible study, we'll sing number 645. 645. Today will lead us in prayer. The young minds will stay with the wise minds tonight in this place. Curtis having to work a little late, so he's a little late. So, we like to have young minds pay attention to the wise minds. Right, David? 645. Sing again. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross, where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last have laid down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. Oh, that old rugged cross, so despised by the world as a wondrous attraction for thee. For the dear Lamb of God, let His glory above do merit to dark Calvary. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true, in shame and reproach gladly bear. Then He'll call me someday to my home far away, where His glory forever I'll share. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
Our God, our Father, have a really down place for the ability to get together again this night. Of course, word study next week, especially with those that are couldn't make it out. I'm sick. I should be the grant. I couldn't recover. And then he soon turned it back with us. My father, the stuff you ask you to give blood over the lessons was to be defeated those things that are wrong and help us be supported those things that are right. Not only politically, but also ethically, morally, and with work, and crossing the neighbors and friends. That is all was the care of good Christians we know we should do, and those who can be blessed in this hour. This fast in Jesus' name. Amen.
Could you make a copy, a couple more copies of it? Yep, if you would. Me too. Luke chapter 20 is where we're at. Y'all new to the class. If you have any questions, you can ask anyone in the class. I'm sure that they can give you whatever information you need for Luke chapters 1 through 19. They are scholars on it now. Just as a background, as far as our study is concerned, as we discussed last week, Luke is the most chronologically adept of the Gospels. It goes from Jesus' birth through his teachings down to the crucifixion, and we've been traveling through the life of Christ in Luke. We're down now to the last week of Jesus' life, Luke chapter 20. He has come through come up to Jerusalem now, and is in the last week of his life. And that Luke chapter 20 is just a few days before his arrest and crucifixion. So we'll begin by reading Luke chapter 20, just so we have a background of the questions that are involved here. So I'll start, and then if you want to read, you can. If you prefer to pass it on, that's not a problem either as far as that goes. Luke chapter 20, beginning at verse 1. I think they're making some more copies back there. Those are old ones. I just turned them over. We have to have color for some of these companies. Davin's made a few extras, so if anybody needs one.
I think you're making the printer this time.
It was just an accident. I'd like to take credit for it. It all fit on one page this time without it going into two pages without me having to try to adjust it. One of you computer wizards teach me how to adjust it out. I'd be happy to make it where I can make the font as big as possible and fit it on one page. You might have to show me 4 or 5 times like that. Just ask her when it comes to computer issues. Luke chapter 20, beginning at verse 1 says, "And it came to pass that on one of those days, as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes came upon him with the elders and spake unto him, saying, Tell us, by what authority dost thou these things, or who is he that gave thee this authority? He answered and said to them, I will also ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or of men? And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If we shall say from heaven, he will say, Why then believe ye not him? But if we say of men, all the people will stone us, for they be persuaded that John was a prophet. And they answered that they could not tell whence it was. And Jesus said to them, Neither tell I you by what authority I do these things. Then began he to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, and led it forth to husbandmen, and went into a far country for a long time. And at the season he sent a servant to the husbandman, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandman beat him, and sent him away empty. And again he sent another servant, and they beat him also, and entreated him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and cast him out. Then said the Lord of the vineyard, What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be they will reverence him when they see him. But when the husband saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours. So they cast him out of the vineyard, and killed him. And what therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He shall come and destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid. And he beheld them and said, What is this then? It is written, The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. All right, who would like to read 19? Trina, would you like to read that for us? Start there.
And the chief priests and scribes the same hour resolved to lay hands on him. And they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them. And they watched him and set before his spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, so they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. And they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly. Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or no? And he perceived that their craftiness, and said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Show me a penny, whose image and superscription have it. They answered and said, Caesar's. And he said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and to God the things which be God. And they did not take hold of his words to the people, and they marveled at his answer and told the peace.
Then came to him certain Sadducees, which denied there is any resurrection, and they asked him, saying, Master, Moses wrote to us, if any man's brother die, have a wife, and he die without children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed to his brother. Therefore there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and died without children, and the second took her wife, and he died childless, and the third took her wife, and he like manner. The 7th also, and they left no children, and died. Last of all, a woman died also. Therefore the resurrection, whose wife of them is she? For 7 had wives. The Jews answered and said to them, The children of this world are given in marriage, but they which are counted worthy to attain that world of the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, neither can they die any more. For they are equal to the angels and are the children of God, being the children of resurrection. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses showed at the bush, when he called the Lord, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For all live unto him.
And certain of the scribes answered and said, Master, thou hast well said. And after that they used not asking him any question at all. And he said unto them, How say they that Christ is saved his son? David himself said in the book of Psalms, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. David therefore calleth him Lord, and now is he then his son. Then in the audience of all the people, he said unto his disciples, Beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes, and love greetings in the markets, and the highest seats in the synagogue, and the chief rings of feasts, which devour widows' houses, and for show make long prayers, and the same shall receive greater damnation.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. First question on the sheet. Everybody got a sheet? First question or statement says, define and give 4 examples of authority. What do we mean by authority? Power? All right, those with power, the right to rule or control. Anybody got a specific definition? I don't have a specific definition down here, but we understand that a person of authority is somebody who has the right to set the standard, the guidelines, or whatever it may be. And I wanted specifically 4 different things that you might think of where authority is shown in our lives today. All right, the government would be one that came to my mind. The home, all right. Workplace, boss, employee. All right, and God being in charge of all things as far as that goes. Those are the 4 that came to my mind. What? All right, school would be a situation where you would have a teacher, student, as far as that goes. We understand, I don't think there's any challenge to our minds as far as where authority is or what it is in that respect. But as we look around society today, understanding what authority is and who has authority or the designation of authority, seems like there's a lot of confusion. Is it confusion or is it just a matter of a rebellion against authority? I think mostly it's just a matter of a rebellion. And that's true in all 4 areas that we discussed as far as examples are concerned. We have a situation in this world where authority is there's rebellion against authority. Is it just a new thing? Where's the first example of a rebellion against authority? Well, I was going back further in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve sinned against God. They rebelled against the authority of God in the eating of the forbidden fruit. So it's been the nature of mankind, even though he knew when Eve answered to Satan, this is what God has said, Satan tempted her and she rebelled against God in that respect. So that is the nature of mankind throughout history. It's something that we have to deal with in looking at our lives. Are we being submitted, are we in submission to authority or not? There's a commercial on the radio that I hear every now and then that says the excuses of Tennesseans for not wearing a seatbelt. One of them is I get a rash. One of them is I get claustrophobic. They didn't use mine. Oh yeah, well, nobody tells me what to do in my car. But that's an attitude of rebellion towards the government and not wearing a seatbelt. Now, I've told you time and again, I am a reformed seatbelt wearer. Every time I see a police car, I put my seatbelt on. No, I tell you what, when I get down to the end of Greer Road, for some reason, fork at 257 in Greer Road, it just clicks in now. If I don't have it on, I put it on. I don't know if it's because when you turn left going up 257, Ridgetop's always sitting right there at the top of that hill. Huh? Well, let's see, how many have I been through? I think I've had 3 tickets on seatbelts. But I wore it all the way up here tonight. Anyway, that's a rebellion against authority, and it's even in my point is that's a minor thing, when we think about it. Seatbelt should be a matter of choice. We won't get into that. But the idea of choice is gone if you're going to submit to the law of God. You're going to choose to serve God when it comes to authority, whether it be in the home, on the job, with the government, or especially spiritually speaking. And so they were challenging Jesus here. What types of authority did Jesus, number 2, or what types of power or authority did Jesus describe in the discussion here when they asked him this question of who's giving you the authority? And if you look at 20 in the second verse, I'll ask you a question. Verse number, let's see. Verse number 4, the baptism of John, was it of heaven or of men? What 2 types of authority does Jesus show that there are there? Heaven, God, and man. So there are 2 different types of authority that are recognized in the world. One is God's, one is man. Of course, you talk about an atheist or somebody like that. Do they believe in the authority of God? No. The only authority that they see is that of mankind. And a lot of times they don't even recognize that authority. It's a matter of opinion. If I believe something, and it goes contrary to whatever the standing of a man or wherever I am, my opinion or my idea is more important or more valid than mankind. So it's important that we have established first and foremost the authority of God. Everything in the picture of authority hinges on what we think about the authority of God. Because if we can make ourselves choose to submit to the authority of God, then it becomes easier to submit to all other authority, I believe. Number 3, what did the religious leaders' unwillingness to answer the question of Jesus show about them? Verses 5 through 7. They had to go through a reasoning process. If we say that John the Baptist's baptism came from God, then, he's going to ask us, well, why didn't you submit to it? Why weren't you baptized? But if we say it's from men, then, the people are going to say, he was a prophet. They're going to stone us. And there would be a full-scale rebellion of the people against them. What does that show in the fact that said, we can't answer it. We're not going to answer it.
They're politically correct way back then.
Yeah. They really didn't care for the answer or the truth. They were just trying to move on through. And so it showed their insincerity as far as what they were trying to get at. All right, number 4. What do each of the following represent in the parable, or Jesus' parable of the vineyard? Jesus gives a parable here in the account of a man who builds a vineyard, sets up a vineyard, and it begins to produce, and he has gone away, and so he sends servants to collect the fruit. Then he sends his son. They abuse the servants. They kill the son, and they decide that they're going to take the vineyard for themselves. In that particular parable, number A under that, who is the man who planted the vineyard in this particular parable?
Jesus.
All right, God. All right, God is represented as the one who planted the vineyard. All right, who are the husbandmen?
Man.
All right, man. More specifically, which men?
God.
All right, more specifically, which of God's men? The Jews. Jesus was talking to here the Pharisees and Sadducees, the religious leaders of this particular day and age, God's religion, or God's chosen people. And so the husband were those people who were set up to oversee the vineyard, God's vineyard, which at that time was the Jewish nation of the Israelites. All right, who were the servants? Who were the ones that were sent to collect the fruit, or who were the ones who were sent to keep God's people in line, or to keep them faithful in the Old Testament? Old Testament. The prophets. All right. So the prophets would be the representative of the servants in this particular parable. So we are seeing here a picture that Jesus is developing about the history of the Jewish nation. All right. And then who was the son? Jesus Christ. All right. So it's a picture of how Israel has developed all the way down through time, looking at the points that the prophets had made of the fact that Jesus Christ would come on the scene. They knew what was going to happen. And what did they do in the parable to the son? Killed him. All right. That was showing a rejection of Jesus Christ and the fact that he knew what was getting ready to happen. Like I said, this was like 3 days before his arrest and his crucifixion that this particular encounter happened. So Jesus is saying, this is what's happened. This is how it was prophesied. And they understood, well, what's number 5? What was Jesus referring to in verse number 16? It says there, he shall come and destroy these husbandmen and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid.
Turn away from the Jews and going to the Gentiles.
All right, so God, or Jesus right here is saying point blank, this is how it's going to happen. God is going to take it away from you and give it to somebody else. And I don't know, Sister Sue, does yours say, when it says there in verse number 16 at the end, or if you've got another version, does it say something besides God forbid there? Certainly not. All right, so the attitude is here Jesus tells them this parable. They understand it to be explicitly pointed at them. They say, it ain't going to happen. Certainly not. And I don't know, if we can understand exactly how that expression might be, but they were beyond the point where they could ever think that this was possible. They could lose their power, their religion, at all. They thought that, it was established and nothing could happen to it. And so I think that it shows a little bit. Of course, when we look at parables, we have to look at it from two different directions. We look at it from how it was meant to those people who it was talking to, as far as those Jewish leaders. But we also have to step back and say, how can this apply to you and I today, or the church today? Can this apply to us? New Testament teaching, it's about God's people as a whole. How would this apply to the church? All right. We look at people that are leaving the church, forsaking the truth, going into denominationalism, whatever it may be, and thinking that God won't pull His relationship away from them. And yet, what do people who are in outside the church think? Everything's okay. I've got God. I can pray to God. But the truth still stands. Just as these people rejected God and the truth of God, God withdrew His fellowship from them and destroyed their situation. He can do the same thing today. And so when people walk away from the truth, they are walking away from the potential of having a relationship with God, just as these people did. So it does, even though this applied directly to those people back in that day, it also applies to this day and age as far as the Church of Christ is concerned. If the church walks away from the truth, whether it be the truth on salvation, or the organization of the church, or worship, whatever it may be, God will pull it away and destroy it, and leave just a remnant as far as that goes. There were people who were in the Jewish nation who were saved, who were transformed from the Jewish religion into the church, and that's always possible as far as that goes. But on a whole scale, the nation of Israel, we know, was destroyed, and the religion of the Jews was destroyed.
Right.
Yeah.
Last week, they had that seminar. And you had, people that are out going on a lot, but several, they had news about how you gotta, the Jews are trying to scare people, you gotta support them, you gotta protect them, you gotta do all this. And I was thinking, well, the person that believes that does not believe New Testament. Yes, there's a whole bunch of examples in there where they say right the opposite. I remember one where I think Peter was what he was saying. He was getting, Peter was preaching something. He had a good point. He said, okay, you rejected us, well, we turned to the Gentiles.
Yep. It goes back kind of to what you were saying back before, as far as in their question or their response to Jesus. It's a politically correct position to accept all religions. That there's no one right way, and there's always a lot of different ways. That's what that is exactly. Does anybody know where the passage of Scripture says that Christians are the Jews of today?
Paul says that too.
Romans 2.
It's talking about where it says he was a Jew.
Yeah, there's a passage of Scripture that point blank says we are the Israel of today, the Jewish Jews of today. The Christian is God's chosen people, is all that's saying. And that's a good passage. I don't have it on the top of my head right now, but it's important for us to understand. I think it's the last part of Romans chapter 2, but I'm not sure.
It says in chapter 2, verse 25, for circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law, but if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcised keep the righteousness of the law, there shall not for his uncircumcision be counted for a circumcision, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outwardly in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God.
Okay, so that's talking about the idea that the Old Testament looked at the circumcision of the flesh was what designated one a Jew or not a Jew. But today it's about the circumcision of the heart, which one who is has their heart operated on by God and in submission to Jesus Christ would be that. So that would entail the church. All right. Number 6. What is Jesus describing in the rejected stone? Verse number 17. Verse 17 says, and they beheld them and said, what is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Alright? What is the rejected stone? Of course, it's talking about Jesus, but what is the analogy that's being made here? Alright? Has anybody ever laid a rock walkway or a rock wall? We got any? Basements? Yeah, whatever it may be. You take your rocks and you got your pile of rocks over here and you try to fit one here and you try to fit one there. This one just doesn't fit anywhere. That one goes over there. You get another one. That one. That's what he's talking about here when he's talking about the builders rejecting a stone. He's talking about building a wall or a building. And so they're looking at these stones to build it, and the builders are determined, well, this is a good one or this is a bad one, and if this one doesn't fit or it's not going to work, then we're going to get rid of it. And so that's when you talk about Jesus, they're saying this stone don't fit what we're doing. That's what the whole Jewish leaders were saying at this point. Jesus doesn't fit into our plans or what we're trying to do, and so we're going to cast him off. And Jesus is point blank. This is what the parable's about. This is what, I'm going to summarize it for you. And that's what he does. He's summarizing exactly where he stands with them and what's going on. What is meant by the term, next question, head of the corner? Head of the corner. All right, holding it all together. Specifically, in our day and age, you have blocks, 8 by 12 blocks or whatever, and so they're all the same, and so the corners are the same. But when it got back into the old time days, when they used rocks, they looked for a specific one that was going to be solid work to fit all the others on in the corners. And it usually was all 4 corners had a specific corner rock, but one of them was the starting point, and sometimes it would stand out further than the rest of the wall. And so that was what is the head of the corner one that was everything else relied on. It had to be the best one, or the strongest one, the most sure one of which to build on. And so,
and center the whole thing together. I've always wondered about how could one stone be considered in the corners just but they use that word cornerstone. Then they build them things that go up like this on each side and the one that goes almost.
But I've not done a whole lot of construction work, but usually when they start building something, they don't take one and put it right in the middle of the wall and start working that way. They start at the corner where they've laid out, they've taken the measurements and laid it all out, and they start right in the corner.
How do they line them up?
How do they wind them up?
It's all building together.
Well, you're talking about on the top as far as that goes. They've got people who worked in woodwork and roofing and all, just like they do today. We're talking at the starting point, the foundation.
I think the cornerstone. In our mind, it's supposed to be I don't know what you call it, one right in the middle of a house that holds both sides. What do you call what?
Maybe hobby.
I-beam?
Yeah, but I think you underneath, but there's one. I think there's a name for it. Where they used to put them. Well, even today they put this and that beam holds all the 2 corners up.
Yeah. But what we're talking about, though, is not what ties it all together at the end. What we're talking about is the foundation at the starting point. Is what Jesus is talking about here, what everything else is built upon. Okay, well, that's a possibility. We need to think about it more. But I think that what we're talking about is foundation. If you go, what Ephesians 2 and 20, what does that say?
Well, the foundation is open and made. And there was slated structures
Right. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. Is he's talking about him being the foundation upon which they had rejected this stone. It was the starting point of or what it was all built upon, the foundation. And so that's kind of what it was built up upon, is Jesus Christ. All right, number 8. What is meant by the terms broken and ground to powder? To whom was it intended? Verse number 18.
Destroying false teachers.
Destroyed and false teachers. All right. Well, we looked at Ephesians 2 and verse 20. You quoted that one as being Jesus the chief, or the foundation upon which nothing else could be built upon. All right. And if we look at the chief cornerstone as being a larger stone upon which everything else was laid out, then it protruded out a little bit, and if you ran into the side of that, you would be crushed, broken, or whatever. And if it fell upon you, it would grind you down. So if Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone, then broken or ground would mean that anybody that goes up against him is going to be destroyed.
That when you think about cornerstone back then, you could say one corner. If it's going, everything's going to be hooked to it. There has to be some way to hold it up there. That means it's the cornerstone of the whole building up at the top. Think about that, son. I'm challenging you. How could it be a cornerstone and hold up the whole building?
How could it be a corner that's at the top?
Because if you've got it going this way and this way, and what's holding all that together at the top is the chief stone. Whether you call it a cornerstone or not, it is the chief stone in the building.
Where is the corner of your house? It's the top.
You're thinking about something small. You're not thinking about what holds things together and supports and produces strength and ties it all together.
That not be the foundation?
Brother Roy, let me ask you this. Would your house, if you didn't have a roof on it, would your walls hold it?
I was thinking about that.
No, but you got a beam that ever since that cornerstone went all the way through that house. That's what holds it all together. Now that's something everything depends on. But if you've got a stone down there in the middle of the house which you're building around, it can't represent it. I think you got your mind all of this stuff.
Next. Here we go. Number 9. What was the motive in questioning Jesus? Verse number 20. What was the motive in questioning Jesus? Verse number 20. Alright? And if you go down and you look at verse number 21, in light of verse number 20, we understand it says point blank that they were, it says they were faking themselves to be just men. And they were trying to twist his words. And then in verse 21, I think it's interesting to look at how they approached him in doing this. And they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly. Neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly. Now, if you look at it in the context of what they're saying, man, how thick can you lay it on? You know, we know you're the best. We know you teach right. We know that you're not prejudiced towards anybody. Tell us, what does this mean? What are you trying to teach us here? And so you see how that works. I know I've got some grandkids, some of them are even in this room, that a lot of times they'll tell me how great I am. How much they love me.
That's the day you get paid.
You know, yeah, with that, or we need a ride, or we need this or that, whatever it may be. But we call that buttering them up, right? And that's what they were doing. Jesus, I don't mean to say that my grandchildren are insincere in what they are saying about me. They love me, I think, I hope.
But still, in this case, what they say might to them be flattering, but its truth is enough.
Hey, we see it all the time. We see it politics. We see it in business. We see it everywhere. People say things in a lighthearted, indifferent way, trying to get their way or to whatever it may be. What we need to be careful is we can see it around us in the sense of, in the worldly sense. Can we see it in our own lives and how we approach God as far as our worship, and our study, and our Christian life? Sometimes I think, in my prayer life, I know that I'm supposed to pray, and I want to pray to God, but sometimes I just feel like I'm not going at it in the most sincere of ways that I can, and that I'm just trying to make sure that I make it. Does that make sense as far as that goes? Our religion is, we always want to grow and improve and be closer to God, and so, we need to challenge ourselves to a deeper spirituality, is all I'm saying. And so I think it's important for us to question ourselves in our relationship on a regular basis, especially so that we can have an effective prayer life. Any comments about that? Number 10, along those lines, how do people tempt Jesus today? They were asking him about the coin. If it's right to pay taxes. Jesus said what? It's right or wrong to pay taxes?
Wrong. Absolutely wrong.
Anybody got a contradictory point about it? Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render unto God the things that are God's. But before he told them that, he says, why do you seek to tempt me? Or why are you going about to tempt me? Jesus recognized their insincerity and that they were trying to trick him in his words so that they could bring him before the powers of the Romans and say that he was leading an insurrection, or going against the Roman authorities by saying that, you don't have to pay your taxes as Jews. But he recognized them as tempting him. What does that mean? How do we tempt Jesus? How are they tempting Jesus at that point?
Catch him in his words.
All right. How do we catch Jesus in his words today, I guess, is what I'm, how do we tempt Jesus? I guess you could go back and look at it. All right. The loving thing to do. You think about what Satan said to Jesus about casting himself off the pinnacle of the temple, and the angels would bear him up lest he dash his foot against a stone, in the sense of tempting him to do something that was wrong or challenging God. Do we do that in the sense of, I know that this isn't right, but God will overlook it or whatever, tempting Jesus in that way?
There have been days they put a gun to the head, shoot it, won't kill it. Does that make it so?
No. But I'm trying to think of it in the standpoint of us to hear. I don't foresee any of us being in a position of using a gun and challenging God in that respect. But this has to be a way or a potential for us. We're looking at the religious leaders here who were tempting Jesus. And so this is something that we should to consider or study out in our own lives. Is, are we challenging Jesus to do something that we should use our own good judgment on?
I think we do a lot, like, for their money. We go get everything we want. We get paid. We might see what's left over. And we put the money back in the truck. We do it for time. We don't give. We know what we should do. We know we should make that big deal. We got to go do something different. I think we do it with our family.
Looking at it, instead of giving the best, giving the second part, challenging, tempting Jesus.
A lot of us used to tell about the man that wouldn't come to service. Was it raining? Raining was always there. But we would see him, he said, he did a lot of service. Bible study, and he knew he was an avid fisherman. He said, well, Lord don't want me to go that day. He said it's raining.
All right. Number 11. What was Jesus' answer to the question question on paying taxes? Turn.
Render under Caesar the things under Caesar.
We just need to get a clarification on what you said before. Number 12. What doctrine did the Sadducees deny? All right. I don't understand how anybody who is religious in nature believes in God can't believe or wouldn't believe the teaching in the resurrection. But they held the Sadducees were more of the Hellenistic mindset. The Greeks had a great influence on them, and so
I never understood how they had such authority as they did. They were a very small number of Jewish sects. They were tiny in comparison to Pharisees, but they knew the law, which I guess is why they had such authority. But the fact that they did not believe in an afterlife was astounding for Jews.
like, if you look at the numbers and power, if you look at the size of Washington, the number of people in Washington, the power that they exert on the country is.
We know how ignorant they are.
This is probably on the internet, so I'm not going to go through it.
I said it.
All right.
No.
Yeah. They're standing at the door, right? Let's go on to the next one. Number 13. Why is marriage not continued in heaven? 34 to 36. No comment on that one either. Alright. Why is there no marriage in heaven besides the fact that that would make for a peaceful no fighting? Alright. We got that one down. We got that's number one. What might be number two? What might be the second reason that there's no marriage? What is the purpose of marriage? Why did God create it? Alright. So what's going to happen? Are we going to die in heaven? Is there a need for procreation? No. So those who are saved in eternity there will be no death. So there's no need for the marriage relationship in that respect. Number 14, how does the statement of God to Moses at the burning bush prove the resurrection? If you go back and you look at Moses and his meeting with God there at the burning bush, God says, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am the God of Jacob. How does that prove the resurrection? Okay, so he put it in a position of what? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were what?
All dead.
Dead by man's standards of physical life in this world, but by the standard of God, they were alive. So that talks of the resurrection or life after death. That's what the point is there. Number 15, what is the point of Jesus' accounting of David calling his son Lord, verses 41 and 42?
What is the what?
The point of Jesus' accounting of David calling his son Lord. That's found in Psalms 110, I believe, where it was quoted. Look over there, verse 1 of chapter Psalms 110. What do we know about the promise made to David as far as the kingdom was concerned? Alright, so there was going to be someone of the lineage of David who was inferior to David by ancestry, and that's something that's different in today's age than the past. Used to, the wise people, the older people, got the respect and admiration, and everybody looked at that. What about society today? Who is honored more, the young or the old?
It's the old.
No. And there's always one or two that are deceived in their own minds. What do we look at? The world is catering to or working around catering to the young people. You know, that's what it's all about. And Old people are put in homes or, cast aside, and I feel like before long the euthanasia is going to be a thing. And it's getting close right now. You get old, so old that, you have no value in society, and so it's time to pull the plug. I ain't going to let you do that because I'm next in line. But that was the idea. In that day and age, there was a pecking order, so to speak, that elders had respect and the younger had respect towards that. And here it's saying that David was saying that his lineage was lowered or raising him up to a standard. And that's what Jesus is asking these people. Now, how is that possible for David to say that he's my Lord? But if you go to Psalms 110 and verse 1, that there says that the Lord said unto my Lord, and this is David speaking, he's talking about God said to my Lord. And so God is the one that elevated Jesus to the position that he is in. And so that's what his point was to them, is God has put him in this position, and that's who he is. He is the Lord. It had nothing to do with the physical or family relationship that they looked at in the sense of, because they were looking for a physical kingdom there. So, all right, last one. How can this be a warning to members of the Church of Christ? Verses 45 through 47. Chapter 20, verses 45 through 47. Says, then in the audience, all of the people he said to his disciples, beware of the scribes which desire to walk in long robes and love greetings in the markets and high seats in the synagogues and the chief rooms at the feast, which devour widows' houses, and for shew make long prayers, and the same shall receive a greater damnation. We understand that Jesus was warning here to those disciples, those people, those Jews in that day, to look at those religious leaders and the hypocrisy that they were living in their lives. I don't see anybody in here that's got on a robe. We have no chief seats. There are some people who make long prayers. How does this apply to us?
That what man considers to be highly spiritual according to all of us.
Yeah. All right, or you can see that it's basically a pretense to religion, and then living, any way that you want to in that respect. So these people, these religious leaders, they destroyed people's lives. They took advantage of people. They used the law to do it. And so he was just warning about the hypocrisy that they lived, and that can be applied to the church. Any questions or comments? All right. I appreciate your attendance. We'll think for just a minute about the Lord's invitation here before we go. 767. We'll look at a passage in Hebrews chapter 11 for just a minute as we close our service here tonight. Hebrews chapter 11, verse number 13. See. It says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Now we're getting close to Thanksgiving, and talking about pilgrims there. So I just thought about that word. But in light of that, we understand that the pilgrims and Thanksgiving and all that surrounded an idea of, and it's not a religious holiday, but it was a celebration of Thanksgiving for these people who had left the old world and had come and traveled to the Americas and set up a new life because of religious beliefs. They were pilgrims. They didn't own anything. They left because of their beliefs and traveled that far. But in that, what I wanted us to look at is this particular passage right here talks about, in general, the eye of faith. It talks about, if you go back and you look at what it says in verses 8, 9, and 10, it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should have received for an inheritance, obeyed, and went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in a land of promises, in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. When we think about that in light of what verse number 13 says, is these people went out and they had the eye of faith. If you think about Abraham and you go back and you look, what was said is God called Abraham in the land of Ur and told him to go, to travel to some place that I'm going to show you. And he went, not knowing where he was going to go. And he says, I'm going to give it to you as an inheritance. You know how much Abraham had in the land of Canaan, which God sent him, as far as an inheritance? He had one little bit of land. Macpelia is what he bought to bury Sarah in. That's all he owned. He never owned a piece of property as far as a farm, a house, anything. The whole time he was there, he wandered around in a tent. Same is true with his son Isaac, his grandson Jacob. But yet he left Ur believing in the promise of God that he would receive an inheritance. It wasn't him that received his inheritance, it was his great grandchildren that received the inheritance when they crossed back over into Canaan and destroyed all those nations for the most part and took over. That was the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. But through the eye of faith, Abraham saw it and it motivated him to do what he did. How would you and I have acted if God had said, you go do this and I'll give you this? What would our expectations be? Well, I'm going to go do this. God's going to, man, it's going to be great. And then we end up with nothing but a burial place for our family. I think that most of us, or most people, would be highly disappointed in that. God didn't keep his word. We think about our lives and the promises of God. Many times we focus on this life and what we're wanting out of this life and what we expect out of this life. And our eye of faith is dimmed so that we don't see really what God has promised us in the long run. No matter what we have to put up with, no matter what we have to deal with in this life, if we're faithful, if we have the eye of faith and see the promises of God and how great things are going to be, if we live faithfully to God, then we can make it through this life and be excited and happy about this life, no matter what happens to us. But it is a matter of maintaining that. When the things crumble around us, when things don't go right, we have to remember that God has promised us that we're going to be rewarded beyond our very imagination in life if we will but be faithful to Him. Abraham was able to do that because he could see afar. I wonder sometimes how well our eyesight is as far as being able to see into eternity and what God has in store for you and I. I hope that our eye of faith can be strong, that we can rely upon the Word of God and look at the promises that He made in His fulfillment of all His promises. Not in the way that those people that He promised it to actually took place, but the fact that God fulfilled His promise and it worked out best in the long run, to the fulfillment of what God's intentions were and what God's will was. And those people who work towards God's will be saved in heaven. So tonight, as we think about it, how well is that my faith working? Am I looking into eternity and seeing the blessings that are there and it's motivating me to do the things that God would have me to do? Or am I looking at the things around me and what's going on in this life? And that's what's dictating how I live my life. I hope that if you're thinking about this life and that's your center of focus, that you'll change your center of focus and think like Abraham did about that city afar off in eternity and how great it will be. And that you'll allow Jesus to control your life and motivate you to do the things that you need to do in order to inherit that eternal land that He's promised to all of us who will be faithful. It starts by being obedient to Jesus in the plan of salvation, doing what Jesus said, and hearing the word, believing, repenting of your sins, confessing Jesus as the Son of God, and being baptized. That is the eye of faith. You believe Jesus is the Son of God, and He's promised to give you eternal life if you will do what He said. But also, we have to maintain that eye of faith through study and prayer and meditation on God's Word, doing the things that are required of us in Christian living, or all the things that we're accountable for as far as our lives are concerned. You know, sometimes our vision dims because we get so entrapped in the world and the things that are going on in our life. I mean, it's just overwhelming at times. And so, you know, we need to recognize the potential of losing sight of heaven because we're so consumed with this life. And if we have, then, you know, God has given us a way to make things right. We need to confess things that are wrong in our lives privately, pray God forgive us, put ourselves back on the path. He'll forgive us if we pray and sincerely do it. But we also need to consider the fact that sometimes we do things and act ways that are contrary to God's will, that are public in nature. People who know that I'm a Christian, know that you're a Christian, look at you and say, I don't want to be a part of that group because so-and-so does this or that. That's a public sin. And when you bring shame and reproach upon the church, you have to confess that as publicly as it is. Simon the sorcerer had to do it. Confess your faults one another and pray for one another. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. If we'll confess our sins and pray to God for the forgiveness of our sins as publicly as they are, no matter what it is, God will forgive us. And we can do the things that are necessary to get to heaven. It'll open our eyes of faith back up, and we can move forward. Tonight, if you think about your life, as I think about my life, is there anything that I need to do, or you need to do to make your life right with God? If you do, I hope that you'll come now while we stand while we sing.
Who at the door is standing, patiently calling in trust with empty handing. Whose is the voice I hear? Sweetly the tones are falling. Open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with thee. Door of my heart I hasten. Will I open wide? Though he rebuke and chasten, he shall with me abide. Sweetly the tones are falling. Open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with thee. Thank y'all for being here. Hope to see you Sunday at 9:30 for a Bible study, 10:30 for worship. Want to let you know some updates on our sick list. Barley, Laney, and Quinny are all home sick tonight. Sister Evelyn was taken to the hospital today by ambulance, so we're praying for her. Ron is out of town working. We'll pray for his safe travels. And Kyle is out working tonight as well. We want to continue to remember those that are on our prayer list that are in serious conditions. Are there any other updates that we need to make at this time for anyone or anyone I've left off? All right, we have the men's business meeting Sunday at 5. We have our Just Services the 26th. We have, I think, coffee and pie on
on Wednesday, the 21st. Are there any other things that I've left off? Singing as well. Any other announcements we need to make? Do we have anyone proposing prayer? All right, pray please. Father in heaven, we're thankful for the time that we can come together to study the Word. We pray, Father, that we've done everything that is pleasing in your sight, that we've grown stronger in our faith, that we can go out to this world, that we can preach the gospel and teach others what they need to do in order to be saved. Be with those that we mentioned that are sick, give them a night of rest. If they're in serious conditions, Father, we ask that you will do something that only you can. Help us, Father, to have faith every day that we live. Forgive us our sins. In Christ's name. So, okay.